It's 6 o'clock, and we will commence the December 5th meeting of the Humboldt County Planning Commission, and we'll start with the salute to the flag.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I'd ask the clerk to take a roll call, please.
Commissioner Levy,
Here.
Commissioner Newman,
Here.
Commissioner Morris,
Here.
Commissioner Bongio,
Here.
Commissioner McCavour. Here. Thank you.
I would ask the director if there are any modifications to the public agenda.
We have no modifications. There are supplemental information for the Higher Ground Agriculture LLC, and this is asking for a continuance to January 23rd, 2020. There is a supplemental 1 and 2 for the application for usury.
Thank you. At this time, we'll take public comments from items that are not on the agenda. Anyone wishing to speak on a non-agendized item that may do so at this time. Keep in mind that the purview of this commission is the land use rules and regulations of the county, and that's what we need to comment on. So anyone wishing to speak, please approach the podium.
3 minutes today, Chairman, not one.
Yes.
Thank you. Kent Sawatsky, had a very good meeting, I felt, today with John Ford and as a Humboldt County zoning administrator on a project that you won't be seeing, actually 2 projects. Because at that meeting, they addressed the concerns that I had for the project. So if you get a chance to go back and review this one, it was Amarath, had 2 different things on the zoning administrator thing. I think you find it quite interesting. The deal we brokered was they're not going to be using generators directly up against public lands. And it was, in me, a very contentious thing because we had setbacks that were, had to have an exception to 600 foot. But having worked that through with the applicants, they saved me the appeal process because I had my check ready to appeal that to you with HumMap if we were going to have those generators there. The people were great to work with. They understood. And I strongly support that being a policy more if you guys hear these things. In fact, I see no reason for us to have generators whatsoever with the quality of solar products we have out there these days. And as far as carbon imprints, potential spills, and all these things, I don't know if they have electrical spills or not, but I used to get shocked. I guess you'd call that electrical spill. So anyway, I wanted to bring those topics to you. Also, I am strongly working, hopefully, with with John Ford and the rest of enforcement to see that we can do some kind of thermal imagery of our barns and facilities around Humboldt County, which has been perceived for a long time to be indoor black market grows. It's time we went after those and did what we could to go ahead and send out letters. If you have a barn and it's glowing, you may get busted next year for growing black market in your barns. Strongly support that. That, of course, is, again, a major concern to all of us, and you're trying to help with your planning here. Just as a highlight, really appreciate the decisions you folks made here. Voting. I know it was difficult for you. You saved me $2,500 to appeal. Terrigen, or as I refer to them as the greedy gringo frackers, basically had to spend the $2,500, and now you put that in the supervisor's laps. And now we'll see what they do with that particular project. So it was going to be there anyway. But I do appreciate. I try and think of Mother Nature, and she doesn't like things that stick up above what she has. And to me, these was kind of like whatever 60 started, 60, 47. Fingers flipping off Mother Nature. That's how I look at that project, and unfortunately, hopefully a lot of people are going to agree on that. It just shouldn't be there, and I think now there are 2 of the races. Rex has an opponent. Tomorrow's the deadline, so some of you may only be here for a year and 1 month or 2 meetings based upon what happens with the Terrigen project and a few other ones, because these are very contentious projects, and so that reflects on planning. And it all ties together in one big bundle, doesn't it? So hopefully the supervisor will do the right thing and follow your lead. Thank you.
Thank you, Speaker. Anyone else wishing to comment? Anyone? Seeing no one, I'll close this section of public comment, and we'll move along to the consent agenda. and I am going to query the public here as to whether or not anyone wishes to comment on these. So the first item on the consent agenda is the Hosford Final Map Subdivision and Lot Line Adjustment, Special Use Extension in the Cutton area. Is there anyone in the audience going to speak in opposition to staff recommendation? Any of the commissioners who would like to have this project pulled for a full public hearing? Anyone? Seeing no one, we'll leave that on the consent. Next item on the consent is today's Humboldt County LLC in the Boyd Road area of Arcata. And this has been recommended to be continued, but I will ask, is there anyone who has traveled considerable distance to speak on this and would not be able to come back at a later time for this? Anyone? Seeing no one, we'll leave that on the consent for a continuance. The third one is the Valdeo Final Map Subdivision Extension in the McKinleyville area. Is there anyone in the audience going to speak in opposition to staff recommendations, or do any of the commissioners want this pulled for a full public hearing? Anyone? Seeing no one, we'll leave that on the consent. The next item is the HUM FDC Investment LLC Conditional Use Permit in the Felt Road area of Miranda. Is there anyone? I see a hand. It'll be a public hearing. The next item is the Jason Miller Conditional Use Permit and Special Permit in the Dinsmore area. Is there anyone in the audience or any of the commissioners who would like to have this pulled for a full public hearing? Anyone? Seeing no one, we'll leave that on the consent. And the next item is the Higher Ground Agricultural LLC Conditional Use Permit in the Garberville-Benbow area. And I think, as the director said, the applicant has wished this to be a continuant. We have the agenda saying recommend approval. Do we need to have a separate motion on this, director, by itself?
Yes.
Okay. Then we will not put that on the consent. And the last item on the consent is the Diana Lavelle Usury Parcel Subdivision Map and Coastal Development Permit in McKinleyville area. Is there anyone in the audience, or do any of the commissioners want this pulled for a full public hearing? Anyone? Seeing no one, we'll leave that on the consent. And we've got one public hearing item, and I've already had some comments on that, so I won't even talk about it being on the consent. So I show on the consent that we're going to work on tonight is the Hosford Final Map Subdivision, today's Humboldt County LLC, a Valdeo Final Map Subdivision, and the Jason Miller Conditional Use Permit. And the Diana Lavelle Usury Parcel Map Subdivision. So those are the consent items.
Move approval of the consent calendar.
We have a motion. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor, please signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed? The consent agenda is approved. And I think what I will do is to I would entertain a motion for the Higher Ground Agricultural LLC Conditional Use Permit to be a continuance. And
Is that-
was there a date certain on that?
Yes, to January 23rd.
Okay. So I would entertain a motion for continuance to January 23rd.
Yes, sir. I'll motion to, for number 6 on the consent agenda to be continued to January 23rd, 2020.
Thank you. Do I have a second?
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor, please signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed? The item is continued. And that brings us along to the one on Felt Road, which is the HUM FDC Investment LLC Conditional Use Permit on Felt Road. Could we get a staff report? Appreciate it.
Good evening, Commission. My name is Rodney Andel. I'm the planner on the HUM FDC Investment LLC, which is a conditional use permit in Miranda, California. The project is located about 1.5 miles outside of Miranda, in this location here to the northeast of Miranda. The project is a conditional use permit for 21,024 square feet of existing mixed light cannabis cultivation with 4 cycles per year in commercial mixed light greenhouses. Water for the project is sourced from a well and a spring on site with a total of 311,000 gallons of existing tank storage, an additional 200,000 gallons of tank storage proposed. Annual water usage is estimated at 200,000 gallons, which is 9.5 gallons per square foot per year. Processing is proposed to occur on site with 3 to 10 employees. The project is served by PG&E with backup generators. This is an aerial image of the project area with cannabis cultivation being here, water tanks being here, and appurtenant accessory structures in these locations here. What you see down here is decommissioned cultivation, which was an expansion that has since been resolved with the county, and all future cannabis growing will occur up here in this area. This is a site plan of the project area showing the cultivation area. These are some existing water tanks, some more existing water tanks being here, and the 2 proposed water tanks being here. The well used for cultivation is located here, with the point of diversion being over here. There's 3 propagation areas being here, here, and 1 over here, and drying to be located in the structure here. Processing is proposed in this building here, which on the site plan shows it outside the 30-foot setback, but county acquired information in 2017 that shows that that's incorrect. The metal building on site that is proposed to be used for processing extends approximately 5 feet over the parcel line of the property to the west per a boundary exhibit prepared by Kolstad Land Surveyors in June 21st, 2017, as shown on this slide here. This is said boundary line. This is the shop showing it extending onto the property. As a condition of approval, the project is conditioned that no processing will take place on site until this setback violation is resolved through lot line adjustment or the structure is relocated to a location on the property outside of the required property line setback on an area that has experienced previous ground disturbance. I'm going to discuss the access to the project site at this time. Access to the proposed site is off School Road via Barnum Road and a private drive. Portions of School Road and Barnum Road pass through state park land, and landowners along School Road have voiced their concerns regarding road conditions and road dust. 21 parcels are known to be served by the access roads, 2 of which are also proposing cannabis projects. The subject parcel is the first one served east of Miranda. The applicant submitted a road evaluation report prepared by the applicant, self-certifying that the access road serves as functional equivalent to a Category 4 road standards. As a condition of project approval, based on state park comments and public concerns, we're requiring an engineered road evaluation for sections within the state park and within 500 feet of the state park lands. We're also requiring that the applicant join and establish a road maintenance association and maintain the roads in accordance with the 5 counties' Salmonid Conservation Road Maintenance Manual. This is what was submitted with the road evaluation report. This is the project site. This here is the private drive, and this is Barnum Road and School Road down in this area. They sent us photographs of the points indicated on this map. I know it's small, but I'm gonna run through these really quick. This is the private drive up here. This is leaving the private drive and heading towards Miranda. This is at 0.2 miles. This is at 0.5, 0.7, and 0.8. They showed more pictures. This one is at 1 mile. This is at 1.2. This is at 1.6. And this is entering the community of Miranda. The staff recommends that the commission find the project consistent with the mitigated negative declaration adopted for the CMM LUO per section 15162C of CEQA guidelines, make all required findings for approval of the conditional use permit, and adopt the resolution approving the HUM FDC Investment LLC conditional use permit subject to the conditions of approval. That's it.
Any of the commissioners have any questions on the staff report? Questions only for clarifications? Well, with that, then we will open it up for public comment. Anyone wishing to publicly comment on this project, please approach the podium at this time. And I would ask that you keep your comments to 3 minutes, please.
Hello, my name is Michael McCaskill. I'm one of the neighboring landowners, or well, technically my mother is the neighboring landowner, and our cousins, the Howitts, are here. It's all been in the family since 1874, I believe, actually. So I think the applicants inherited some problems with that they bought into, and I, feel sorry for some of what they've had to go through. And I think they have done a lot of good work on that. I'm a little concerned. My biggest concern is the water usage. Just before this last storm, even though we had about 2 inches of rain in Miranda, we're directly downslope towards Miranda from them. I was out, doing a bunch of stuff out there, and I observed that one of our biggest ravines, which has always been constantly wet with water dribbling from pool to pool in it, has totally dried up this year. There are some unconnected little pools in it, and it's unusually dry. It has been a long, dry year after a wet spring, but the river was looking, basically my lifetime experience with it, I'd never seen it that dry when there's other moisture around. And so I'm concerned about the water usage, and I laud them exceptionally because they have a huge amount of water storage. And I would just ask that the irrigation well not be used between, say, May and October or whatever, if you have guidelines for that. So sort of a forbearance so that they're not drawing groundwater during the most of that. As far as, the generator and the light in the road, I don't think Barnum Road's actually that nice, and a lot of the problems are from landowners who are not in the process, and it's unfortunate that there's not more grading attention paid to stuff. But I would like something in there so that if, for instance, the light pollution is not taken care of, or if the road is not taken care of, that in some way the permit could be suspended or something, or just some teeth in it to make sure that the light is always covered and that the road isn't taken care of. So that's basically my objections, but thank you all for your time.
Thank you very much, sir. Anyone else wishing to comment?
Ken Swatsky, that's why I hung around here, and that's why I made a suggestion. Whenever possible, you have 3 generators on site. You have PG&E according to the locations we have. I see no reason for those backup generators not to be replaced with a solar system. You have perfect layout, you have roofs. The concern of all of us on the generators is not just the noise, but anytime you're using something that has a very high carbon imprint, anytime you're hauling in fuels to 3 different generators, you have an exacerbated chance of spills. and contamination, which there's no reason for with today's technology. I would think maybe the applicant would volunteer to go ahead and say, I don't need those 3 generators, and I'll switch over to a solar system or a wind system. All these things are available out there. And of course, a lot of our angst with Humboldt and the litigation settlement we have was relative to generation use, mostly on timberlands, and I don't know how this one qualifies. I did want to make note that the road does appear to be something that hopefully you will mitigate and deal with. The road on the earlier project that I mentioned earlier here that was held, but was nowhere near a Category 4 road, but I didn't make objection to that because the neighbors weren't objecting to it. There was nobody coming and complaining about the road. But when you have people self-certifying that the road's something, and you don't have the county going out and actually making, I'm not talking about planning staff making that determination. Mr. Bronco or someone of his caliber should be the one out there asserting what category those roads are. And if the turnouts are acceptable, and there should be a full study, unless it's quite obvious that they have something that's comes up to that standard, obviously, to all of us. So hopefully we'll address the concerns of the neighbors in this area. I did notice the water storage and usage here appear to be at least 3 times what I would normally see for that size, and that does concern me, that they would be using that excessive amount of water or feel the need to store that amount of water, and that to me should be I applaud them taking the water and doing forbearance, taking it off their rooftops this time of year and storing it, and I would prefer to see that as far as a water source. All of these aquifers are interconnected. There's only so much water out there, and when you have more people cumulatively pumping the aquifers dry for large quantities of water, apparently you're licensing them to use an excessive amount of water for this because of the storage that you're allowing there. And that does bother me, that people are not doing and conserving Mother Nature's water, which I consider to be platinum these days. So hopefully we will address that concern also. Thank you for my opportunity to speak, I feel, on Mother Nature's behalf today.
Thank you, Speaker. Anyone else wishing to comment?
Good evening. I'm Dean Howett. I'm here with my brother Brent Howett. We're both residents of Eureka. We own, we're co-owners of the 10-acre parcel that the encroaching processing building is on. That's 211-376-019. I spoke to this commission at the October 3rd meeting. At that time, we were at a stalemate with HUM FDC people about how to, various ways we could resolve this. We weren't getting anywhere. Since that time, they have made us an offer to buy our property. We have nothing signed yet. We are basically in agreement. We were supposed to have something signed before this meeting occurred. No one has shown up. I don't know if there's anyone here from that outfit, but we have nothing in writing. So our position now is a little different than when I made my notes to talk to you, and I apologize. I'm having to ad-lib a little bit. My brother and my primary concern is the location of that building, which is a permanent cement foundation building. It basically renders our property unsellable. So we're hoping in some way to resolve it. The thing I would ask of you folks is that if you approve a permit for HUM FDC, that it contain the conditions that Rodney set forth. Attachment 1, number 4, speaks about the encroaching building, and we feel adequately protected as long as that condition is part of the permit. Thank you.
Thank you, Speaker.
Can I
Comment?
ask it, just a quick follow-up, sir? So I just wanted to, because I saw your comments on this project, but as you understand it, the condition that is now attached, requiring resolution of the encroachment on your property, as far as you can tell, that seems to satisfy your concerns?
Yes, that's our position tonight.
Okay,
We feel that no matter what happens with the property sale, whether it goes through or not, if that condition is in there, that's sufficient for us.
okay. All right, well, thank you for your time tonight.
Thank you, Speaker. Anyone else?
Good evening, Commissioners, and thank you for your time. My name is Kathy Moley. I work with Pacific Watershed Associates, and I've been working with the applicant over the last 2 years. I was first on the property approximately 2 years ago when there was a transition from the previous owner and previous managers to the current owners, and documenting the mess, so to speak, what poor condition things were in. There was also a reason I came on was because there was a diesel spill on the property. Over the past 2 years, I've seen the property be cleaned up extensively. There is the largest water tank farm I've ever seen. It's almost like they grow tanks there. There's that many tanks. We have, over the course of the last summer, been on site probably 10 times. We have removed approximately 10 18-yard trucks of contaminated soil. We have now gotten to the point where at depths of 25 feet below ground surface, that we have met the Regional Water Quality Board's conditions of approval. We have approval to fill that hole back in, which we have done. That area has been now recontoured. I believe that the applicant's project is based on forbearance for the well. I believe that's what their course was. And I did want to touch a little bit on Barnum Road. I know that they did put in a new large road accessing it, which kept them off of Felt Road, coming through Barnum, which has been a long-standing access road for many people, as well as logging. And there has also been a new road that they put in, which is, it looks to me a Category 4 road, the new road they put in. So they put a lot of work onto the property. On Barnum Road, south of the, I don't know, maybe that's west of the gate. Anyways, there is a very large gully on the inboard side of the road. And that gully, by my investigations, results from a slide that occurred at a stream crossing, and it's a diversion. And that diversion persists today and is a problematic portion of the road, not necessarily the applicants. So those are basically my comments today. And having been on the property no less than 10 times over the last 2 years. Thank you.
Thank you, Speaker. Next speaker, please.
Good evening. My name is Jeff Slack. I'm an attorney at Jansen Malloy. Thank you. I'm an attorney at Jansen Malloy here in Eureka, and I represent that outfit known as Hum FDC. And I would just like to reiterate, per Mr. Howitt's concerns, the applicant is ready, willing, and able to follow staff's recommendation in either moving that building, purchasing the real estate, performing a lot line adjustment, or what other else mitigation we can have in resolving the property line boundary dispute. So, thank you.
Thank you. Question, please. Go ahead.
This may be a question for staff, but I'm going to ask it of you because I would think that you would have checked this out. But that building that's on the property line, is it permitted? Was it permitted when it was built, or is it a illegally built structure?
To be honest with you, I do not know the answer to that question, sir.
Thank you.
That building is not permitted. It came with the property when the new landowner purchased it.
Thank you. Thank you, Speaker. Anyone else wishing to comment? Anyone? Seeing no one, we'll close this section of public comment. We'll bring it back to the commissioners for discussion. Commissioners?
I'll be first. I'll follow up that question with, if that's an unpermitted structure, how is this project even coming before us? Shouldn't that have been rectified through code enforcement or something to get it here, or it be part of the plan that it get brought into?
So the ordinance for the cannabis or commercial medical marijuana land use ordinance, this is being processed under, allows approval of something called a provisional permit, which identifies that there may be violations on the site, and part of the approval is to bring those violations into conformance. So by requiring the building to be relocated or to have the property line relocated to bring the site into conformance, that would be consistent with that.
Thank you, Director. Noah?
I have a question for Mr. Yandel. Mr. McCaskill brought up his concerns about the drying up of a water course. A longtime neighbor has never seen it so dry. It has been a dry year, but can you confirm whether in fact forbearance from use of the well during the 5 or so months of the dry season is a condition of this permit?
Give me a sec, okay?
Sure.
Through the chair, that is not a condition that's currently applied on this project.
I was looking at the agency referrals, and it appeared that there was no comments, no response at all from Department of Fish and Wildlife on this project. Is that correct? Because usually they're all over that issue.
That is correct. And in response to that, I reached out to Mr. Manthorn, and I sent him sections from the staff report that address biological and water. And I guess in a nutshell, I'll read a portion of what he said. This is very in a nutshell.
Okay.
He said, these conditions seem like a good plan should they be implemented as the conditions state. The conditions he's referring to are the biology findings for the general plan, water findings for irrigation, the annual water usage, and the conditions of approval regarding the WRPP, noise from fans and generators, mixed light, the applicant installing and utilizing water meters on both wells and the spring diversion to demonstrate that there is sufficient water supply to meet the demands of the project without having to rely on surface water diversion during the summer months. Comply with the terms of the streambed alteration agreement, and some other standard ones like fuel storage, wildlife encounterment, refuge, and synthetic netting.
So they do have an LSAA for their diversion?
Yes, sir.
From that department, yeah.
Yes, sir.
Okay, thanks.
Mike?
So I had a question for staff along the same lines. It looks like there was, with one of the commenters here this evening about light. So that is number 12. Is that about the light concern with the first speaker, public speaker that came to the mic?
Are we talking about light from greenhouses?
Yes.
Okay. The project is conditioned for the applicant to adhere to international dark sky standards.
Right, number 12.
Yes. Yes, as it says here, this permit is not authorizing any mixed light in the nursery or the greenhouses until it can be demonstrated that the applicant does adhere to these standards. So no light escaping these greenhouses.
Okay. And then he had mentioned concerns about the road, the mixed road. Is there anything at all in here for
There is.
conditions?
There is, as I stated in my staff report, there's conditions to get a start a road maintenance association or join one and adhere
Can
to.
you point that out on the report here on the attachment 1, is it in there?
Yes,
or-
let me get to it. That's number 5, sir. And number 6.
Okay. Yeah, about joining a road maintenance association,
Yes, and also having an
consent or
engineer.
establish it.
Yes.
What do you mean exactly by, because there is none right now, right?
We do not know that.
Okay. So what's it take to establish a road maintenance association for this to be approved or go through or continue?
Well, the applicant would need to notify the neighboring property owners, try to get enough people to show up to, hold a meeting and basically establish a road maintenance association by resolution, appoint a director or manager for that road maintenance association. And then they would decide at those meetings how to allocate whatever funds they decide to collect from themselves for road maintenance.
Is there any teeth in there about if there isn't meetings happening or if the neighbors don't cooperate? Is there something to go through with this beyond that then? Or what happens?
Well, it is a condition of the provisional permit that needs to be satisfied within 2 years of project approval. If it is not satisfied, they will be out of compliance with our code and subject to some
Okay.
action.
I see possibly, Mr. Slack, did you have a little answer?
I can address your question if you.
Please come up.
So, when forming a road.
Wait. Come up to the microphone so it's recorded.
Get excited. Sorry. When forming a road maintenance association, you have a set of bylaws that govern the association, and part of those bylaws authorizes the road maintenance association itself to file liens for assessments that are duly assessed by the road maintenance association. So that's your teeth, that's your hook
Okay,
in ensuring compliance.
good.
I was just going to say, part of the struggle here is that your question was, is what if the other property owners don't consent to join the road maintenance association?
Right, that was part 2.
So at this point, if those conditions can't be complied with, we would be back in front of you to revisit these conditions.
If I could through the chair as well, there is the condition of approval number 6, which would require a engineer's evaluation of the portions of the road that go through the state parks.
Right.
To require improvements for those portions. So that's not the entirety of the road, but that is, there are some segments of there that outside of the Road Maintenance Association would be required under this permit to be improved by the applicant. And 500 feet on either side of the state parks as well.
Okay, thank you.
Alan?
Mr. Bronco's not here, so I can't ask him, but it would seem to me that that's a recorded document. It shouldn't be that hard to find, and that should have been something that was part of this project. If there was a road maintenance association there, I can't see how that could not be part of it.
Well, we actually do not believe that there's a road maintenance association there. We're not prepared to say that there is not, but we don't have any evidence that there is one. So it kind of seems like there probably isn't one there.
Okay, thanks. Could I actually ask Kathy Moley to come answer a question? Thank you. I mean, I'll be honest, this looks like a pretty good project to me, and a case where a lot of cleanup has already been done to get it to this point. But since a couple of the commenters have raised questions about water supply impacts on the watershed, can you explain? I mean, it says that there are 311,000 gallons of water storage, and an estimated 200 or so gallons, 100,000, 200,000 of gallons of use. So, I mean, I just want to understand if there's any reason why the applicant would be drawing significant water from the well during the dry season months, to the best of your understanding?
So I have a question for you as far as the, what is it, 300 and something thousand gallons?
Well, that's what our, I mean,
And so
yeah.
my question is that pending approval and the ability to get a grading permit, I know that there are intentions of 2 large, whether they're 50,000 or 100,000 gallon tanks in preparation for that. So I don't know if that's in addition to the 300 or if it's part of the 300.
Actually, I'm reading it more carefully, and it says that there is proposed to put in 200 more gallons of storage.
2 100,000 gallon tanks.
200,000, yeah, 100,000. Would those replace the existing tanks? I mean, I guess I'm just trying to get at the question of
I
how
see-
much water use is envisioned for this project.
I haven't done the math on that because I've not been the primary on this. I came in into a environmental aspect.
Okay.
I think there's, especially with the new tanks, there is lots of water storage available, which will allow them to come off of the well during the summer months. And I had a question when Mr. Yandell first put up the map, the site map. They also indicated a diversion, which looked like it was a surface water diversion. And that is no longer in existence. My understanding that all their water is coming from the well, and which is on a different part of the property. So they've come off of a surface water. They've used the well, and I'm speaking kind of anecdotally. I talked with the applicant for sure, and have gone to a newly installed well and are using that to fill up the existing tanks. And once the applicant is approved, then they can go for the grading permit, which is required to put up the larger tanks,
Right.
which will provide them substantial.
Like Pioneer-style tanks or something, yeah.
But I have an updated operations plan from September of 2019 that states their primary source is the well, but they say there is also a springed version used secondarily only during the wet season. That's the information the
okay.
county has, and I have it indicated on the map.
Okay, great.
Okay. And it sounds like Fish and Wildlife has signed off on that diversion
In
and their
fact-
plan for use.
In fact, the LSA states that they can take no more than 300 gallons even during the dry season, which the applicant is not.
Even during the wet season, you mean?
Even in the dry season.
Oh, okay.
But the applicant is forbearing.
I see. They are forbearing from the surface water diversion.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Is the applicant here? Maybe if we have any unanswered questions about the water source in particular, he could speak to that?
If I could, one thing, their operations plan describes that they are forbearing, and they are also required under the cannabis ordinance to forbear.
From the surface water diversion, yes.
Yes.
Right. I mean,
We actually didn't use any. Hey, I'm Thomas Harwood, by the way. So I'm the operator. This is Steve. He's the owner of the property. We didn't use any of the diversion at all. It all came from the second well that was drilled on the property, because the first well, I guess, could never be verified that it was permitted. So we drilled the new well, and then, we probably stopped pumping out of there, like, I'd say, end of June, and still.
From the well,
From the well,
Yeah.
yes, and still probably didn't even use half of our water that we had, so.
Great.
Now all the tanks are full again.
So if you don't have enough tanks, people complain that you're not storing enough water. And if you put in a lot of tanks, people wonder why you're using so much water. But is it fair to say that you probably have more storage now than you will need for this operation?
Absolutely, for sure, yes.
All right, good enough for me.
Yes.
Thanks.
All right. Any other questions?
Any other questions for the applicant? Thank you. Any other comments? Melanie?
I had a question for staff. In terms of the agreements or tentative agreements that might have been reached with the adjacent landowner. Was there an attempt made to maybe adjust the line and maybe sell that piece?
There has not been to this point. I've only heard verbal testimony from the neighboring parcel owner that they are intent on selling the property, but there still would have to be a lot line adjustment or a merger because that structure is out of conformance with our county building code and our fire safe regs. Okay?
I've actually got the purchase agreement right here that I'm gonna meet with Mr. Howitt as soon as we're done. I've got 2 copies for us, so, which, you've talked with our attorneys, and so we'll get that signed at the end of the meeting. Got it right here, to purchase the property, actually, yes.
Okay. Thank you. Any other comments? Questions? Looks to me like most of the concerns that I've had have been addressed. It looks to me like the sufficient water, looks like the access looks good, and if the neighboring owner and the setback violations are in the realm of getting put together, that sounds good to me. So that sounds to me like a pretty decent project.
I have to agree with that, with the conditions that are put in here in our report. So I'd like to move and find the commission has considered the addendum to the mitigated negative declaration adopted from the commercial medical marijuana land use ordinance pursuant to section 15164 of the state CEQA guidelines, make all the required findings for approval of the conditional use permit based on evidence in the staff report, and adopt the resolution approving the proposed HUMFDC Investment LLC project subject to recommended conditions.
We have a motion. Do we have a second?
I'll second that.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion on the motion? Is everyone clear on the motion? Melanie?
I just had a quick comment. We didn't really address the other adjacent landowners' comments in regards to the light pollution. And I just wanted to say, it's my memory at least, and, you know, we had this before us a few weeks ago, that it is dependent on calling in. It's complaint-based. Isn't that correct? There are no scheduled inspections because this is what one of the commenters was asking for. But I believe that it is based on whether complaints are received. And so I do encourage all adjacent landowners for any project of any sort, cannabis or otherwise, to, even if you feel, you know, often you don't feel like doing that to a neighbor, but it is complaint-based, and otherwise, as far as I know, there's no scheduled visit.
Okay, we have a motion before us. Is everyone clear on the motion? All in favor, please signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed?
Nay.
Project is approved, 5-1. And with that, we will move along on our agenda, and I believe it's the next item on the agenda is the public hearing item, and it is the Emerald Triangle Group LLC Company Special Permit, and it's in the Garberville area. If staff could give us a report on that, I'd appreciate it.
No problem. No problem.
Go ahead.
Good evening, Commissioners. My name is Stephen Luther. I am the assigned planner for Emerald Triangle Group LLC Co's special permit applications for distribution and manufacturing at 829 Redwood Drive, Garberville. The project proposes to utilize existing commercial buildings for non-volatile manufacturing and distribution of cannabis products. The project further proposes to demolish an existing concrete building in the middle of the lot and construct a new 180 square foot fully contained metal building to house an ethanol extraction unit. Specifically, the applicant is requesting a special permit for distribution, a special permit for manufacturing, an exception to the loading zone size requirement, and approval of the design review study. I want to note the project was first noticed for the October 17th zoning administrator hearing. The project was then renoticed for the planning commission hearing due to the substantial number of public comments received in opposition. This staff report will be identifying those issues and addressing them. The project site is a 0.12 acre parcel located in downtown Garberville on the commercial frontage of Redwood Drive. The two applications were submitted in December 2016 and are being processed under the Commercial Medical Marijuana Land Use Ordinance, Ordinance 1.0. Public comments were received stating the project does not comply with required setbacks. The project is within 600 feet of churches. Although now closed due to fire damage, the Presbyterian Church was also the site of a preschool. Under the CMM LUO, the setbacks from property lines and sensitive receptors apply only to cultivation and processing operations. This project is for distribution and manufacturing and is therefore not subject to those setback requirements, nor is it subject to any CCLUO 2.0 setback requirements. The site is currently developed with 3 existing buildings. The first is a 3-story wood frame building. The first floor is a commercial frontage. The second floor is office space currently occupied by the Humboldt Independent newspaper, and the third floor is a 2-person residence. No changes are proposed for the second floor office or third floor residence. A 2-story concrete building is in the middle of the lot, and a 2-story metal building in the rear of the lot is currently used as a 20-unit storage facility. The concrete building was identified as possibly having historic significance. An investigation was conducted by Archaeological Research and Supply Company in February 2019 and found no historic significance that for the purposes of CEQA would be considered a historic landmark. The applicant is proposing minor interior improvements, including development of an ADA accessible restroom to use the first floor commercial frontage for non-volatile manufacturing and distribution of cannabis. The project will manufacture solventless extracts utilizing the mechanical methods of water, ice, screens, presses, centrifuges, and steam distillers. Distribution will involve the weighing, packaging, labeling, and loading of cannabis. No trimming of cannabis will occur on site. Public comments raised concerns about odor, and conditions require the applicant to install a ventilation system for odor control. The applicant has a conditional will serve letter from the Garberville Sanitary District to provide water and wastewater services to the site. The conditions of the GSD are included in attachment 3 in the packet before the commission tonight, and these improvements have also been included as conditions of approval. The site will not be open to the public, and it will be equipped with security cameras and secure entry. The hours of operation are Monday through Sunday, 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. The operation may run up to 24 hours during peak seasonal demand. The applicant has submitted a neighborhood design survey demonstrating the proposed project conforms with the neighborhood character. That study is available in attachment 3 of the packet before the commission tonight. The applicant is proposing to demolish the concrete building and construct in its place a single-story 12 by 15-foot metal building to house an ethanol extraction unit. The storage unit building will be renovated with a refrigeration unit and used to store cannabis and cannabis products. Staff conducted environmental review and finds the project is exempt from CEQA per Class 1 for existing facilities and Class 3 new construction of small structures. The site is zoned community commercial with a design review combining zone, C2D. The CMMLUO allows distribution and non-volatile manufacturing in this zone with a special permit. Several public comments were received stating that the proposed activity is not an appropriate commercial use at this location. The site does have a general plan designation of community general, commercial general, excuse me. The use types that are allowed and not allowed do not neatly align with the proposed commercial cannabis activity. However, this designation is intended to apply for lands that are suitable for commercial development and services that are geared for regional needs. There is a regional need in southern Humboldt for services to manufacture value-added products and distribute them to market. The Planning Commission must consider whether the proposed use is consistent with the CG land use designation. On-site parking consists of 4 spaces for residential use in the rear of the lot. The commercial frontage of the site is accessed off Redwood Drive. There are 13 on-street parking spaces on the block, one of which is designated ADA. There will be 5 employees per work shift, so the variable parking demand is 5 spaces, and the site will not accommodate these spaces off-street. A review of historic imagery supports the finding that the proposed use is a substitute non-conforming use. This historic image dated circa 1950 shows the building with a business sign reading beauty shop. The evidence demonstrates the premises was in use as a commercial establishment prior to the 1965 adoption of the zoning code. And per Humboldt County Code, no additional parking spaces are required when existing uses are transferred to new operators who will continue the use without significant change. The loading zone for distribution is accessed in the rear of the lot by an alley off Maple Lane. Public comments raised concerns about the alley access. The applicant does have deeded non-exclusive easement access through this alley. The proposed project will have a designated loading zone of 15 feet by 34 feet at the rear of the lot. There will be 1 to 2 deliveries of product per day using up to 2 vans that are about 18 feet in length. The applicant has requested an exception to the loading space size requirement, which is typically 10 by 60, but due to the size and scale of the business operation and the vehicles used, the applicant does not require that space. In addition, the applicant has a lease agreement for 2 parking spaces at the Hemp Connection parking lot, and the vans will be parked at this site overnight. Finally, public comments were received about the potential for fire risk resulting from the manufacturing activities on site, specifically the ethanol extraction. The project proposes to use non-volatile manufacturing methods to extract cannabis products. And in response to these concerns, language was added in the conditions of approval to clarify that no ethanol extraction will be occurring in the 3-story wood frame building. Ethanol extraction is proposed to occur in the new fully contained 180 square foot metal building. The applicant proposes to use a closed loop extraction unit. The building will be required to comply with California building and companion codes. The operations plan states there will be between 55 to 110 gallons of ethanol in the metal building, and the operation must file a hazardous materials business plan for this. The new building will require an H, or high hazard occupancy, from the building division. This means the walls of the building will need to have a minimum blast-proof fire rating of 2 hours. The H occupancy further requires sign-off from the state fire marshal. In response to these concerns about fire, a condition of approval was added stipulating that no ethanol extraction is allowed until the new building is permitted and receives final occupancy sign-off. The project was referred to the Garberville Fire District. The response was denial with the comment that the district objects to volatile manufacturing. Ethanol is considered a non-volatile solvent under county definitions. In addition, the applicant will be required to obtain a Type 6 manufacturing license from the Manufactured Cannabis Safety Branch, and state regulations also define ethanol as a non-volatile solvent. In conclusion, staff's recommendation is the commission find the proposed project is exempt from environmental review per section 15301 and 15303, make all the required findings for approval of the special permits, and adopt the resolutions approving the special permits subject to the conditions of approval. And that concludes the staff presentation.
Thank you. Any questions from the commissioners relative to the staff report? Seeing none, we'll open up this to the public comment. Anyone wishing to publicly comment on this project, please approach the podium at this time.
Good evening, Commissioners. Allison Jackson. I'm with the Harlan Law Firm, and I represent one of the neighbors, neighboring properties, Craig Lehman. I wrote a letter earlier, and I'm not going to go through that letter again. It was written much before this last staff report. But there are two issues I want to take straight on. One is the proposition that this is not subject to CEQA because there is an existing facility new construction exemption, and the other one with respect to ordinances, the county's ordinances and sensitive receptors. Under Title 14, 15031, the existing facility exception is utterly inapplicable to this situation. This is not a situation where you have an existing distribution and manufacturing facility that is renewing its permit or where someone has purchased it. This is a new one that needs to be specially permitted. And you may not lawfully use those exemptions, period. With respect to the ordinance preclusions, so one of the major problems here is the location within the sensitive receptors. Now, with all due respect to staff, I disagree with their assessment based on my readings of the ordinances. Under Humboldt County Ordinance 314-55.4, that regulates commercial cultivation and manufacturing. If you look at 314-55.4.2, it explicitly finds that it applies to cannabis for medicinal purposes. It's clear in the reading of the statute. I mean, I can quote it exactly, but it applies to medicinal cannabis. Now, under 314-55.4.6.4.13, that describes the sensitive receptors, which are churches within 600 feet. Now, if you follow along and go down to the other ordinances, under 314-55.4.7, it describes cannabis support facilities as being distribution of medicinal cannabis, and specifically precludes it in areas defined with respect to sensitive receptors. It also does that with respect to manufacturing under 314-55.4.8.2. So I'm reading specifically from the county's own ordinances. And given that there is sensitive receptors within a 600 feet range, there is no way that even if you do apply CEQA, that you could get over that hump. But in any event, between the failure to comply with CEQA, this is not an existing facility that has been in operation, and your own ordinances, I don't see how this can be passed at all. Thank you.
Thank you, Speaker.
Ms. Jackson, could I ask you a quick follow-up? I didn't have the relevant sections of the ordinance in front of me, but were you citing from the first ordinance or the second ordinance?
I'm signing from the ordinance I copied this afternoon from the county's own website.
Okay.
That's-
Because I think the issue is that this project is judged by the standards of the ordinance that was in effect when it applied, not the one that was subsequently passed.
It could if you want to try apply, but I'm reading you what the ordinance says now, and it's supposed to apply. And in any event, you have got an insurmountable problem with CEQA. This is not an existing facility.
No, your letter was, it definitely raised some really serious concerns. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Brooke Lieben-Epperly. My family owns a building immediately to the south of this project. As I understand it, one of the aspects of zoning law is to protect the value and enjoyment of properties by separating incompatible land uses and minimizing their potential negative impacts upon each other. The applicant is requesting that this facility with an ethanol extraction be placed in an area currently not zoned for this type of business. To me, that is incompatible. Placing this type of facility in an area currently zoned for it would be more appropriate, minimizing the negative impact on the surrounding commercial areas. I was happy to hear tonight that there is some safeguards for this potential ethanol extraction. But I am sure that the citizens of Manola, Kansas, Hennepin, Illinois, Fort Worth, Texas, and Crockett, California all believed that the facilities near their homes also had safeguards. Last October, when the fire broke out near Crockett, Highway 80 was closed for quite some time. I cannot imagine what a fire of that magnitude would do to the main street in Garberville. And what would happen to the livelihoods of the owners and operators of neighboring properties if this horrible thing should ever happen? I understand that there are other permits that have already been granted, but by looking at Google Earth, it appeared that those were in buildings not nearly as close together as what we're looking at Main Street, Garberville. The shared alley is not county controlled, it is private property, and I do not really believe there is sufficient room for parking and loading zones without blocking this narrow alley. This would prevent the people who work in the two businesses housed in the building we own from accessing their parking. We would have no objections to this building being used for retail or strictly packaging, something that does not include an ethanol extraction. That is what it's currently zoned for. This would maintain the safety of the neighboring buildings, businesses, and homes. But the project as it is not a good fit for this location. I would also ask that the Building and Planning Department please review their notification system for these meetings when things are moved. A good deal of people did not realize that this would be occurring tonight. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Speaker. Next speaker.
Well, it was kind of glossed over. Staff showed a chart. The way I interpreted, they said is this is not zoned or designated correctly for this use. That's plain and simple what's there. So you have to find some extremely overriding concern, and it was mentioned that this addresses a need within the community because they don't have enough places to do this. And I believe that's the bar you have to reach because of it not being correctly zoned. And you may go back to what I saw, there was little boxes on there and didn't seem to be compliant with the zoning. Me sitting on a planning commission before, those are concerns that always have to be addressed. Part of what your thing is the character of the neighborhood. Now, obviously, this is not a beauty shop. And that's the historical use that was referenced here. It is a new use. I've noticed some of your things as far as the character of a community being on a major street like this. In Willow Creek, you went ahead and approved a facility in the middle of your Willow Creek over the objection of some people. I maybe see one car there and the building looks totally boarded up. That's the appearance you have. That's the appearance that these particular facilities give. As you drive through Eureka, looking at the buildings on the right-hand side, they say, well, we're going to get all these things redone. They look like they're boarded up because that's the atmosphere you have for these processes. That's not friendly to a community. That's not what induces people to want to develop in a community. And part of your overriding concerns are to take the character or neighborhood and ensure that this is not going down a path, in my opinion, of this nature, especially when you have to have all these overriding concerns regarding the existing zoning. Maybe I didn't understand staff report, but that's what I took away from that particular project. I really like the concrete building. Hate to have to say that, but that thing's a neat little building there. Hate to see it go, but from a construction thing and from looking at this kind of project, it just doesn't seem to be the correctly located place. Have them go to somewhere where it's correctly zoned and designated without exceptions. There was a whole bunch of constraints listed. Well, this is not an explosive product, and yet they're being required to put it within an explosive facility. So there is kind of a contradiction there. If that is not explosive, then I guess you just have a metal building, or actually it could go inside of the existing building. I don't quite understand. There seems to be a contradiction in the advice you're getting from staff regarding requirements and the assertion that this is not having any potential of causing problems. So this is a little bit troublesome. Hopefully you'll look at this from the neighbor's viewpoint and maybe go through Willow Creek sometime and see what those projects that you went ahead and looked like boarded up projects now are. That does not make it friendly for the people who want to have business in town. Thank you.
Thank you, Speaker. Anyone else wishing to comment, please approach the podium.
Commissioners. So my name's Dustin Owens. I'm the attorney for Emerald Triangle Group LLC. I just wanted to address briefly some of the comments that have previously been made, including Ms. Jackson's comments. With regard to CEQA, I'll tell you that staff got it exactly right. This is exempt under section 15301 and 15303, but it's also probably exempt under the common sense exemption of California Code of Regulations, section 15061B3. That applies to a project where there's no significant effect on the environment. What CEQA defines as an effect on environment or a project is something that has either a direct physical change to the environment or an indirect physical change to the environment. This particular project, the physical things that are happening to the environment are taking down an old building, putting up a new small metal building in its place, which is exempt under 15303, and interior changes to the existing commercial use of the property, and some interior remodel. Those are plainly outside of CEQA's gambit and plainly exempt from CEQA. I also wanted to address the comments regarding the sensitive receptors. This is an application under the 1.0 ordinance. Essentially, all of the zoning ordinance citations that Ms. Jackson gave are from the 2.0 ordinance. They do not apply to this application. The setbacks do not apply. Staff has that correct. With regard to the ethanol extraction, it is not hydrocarbon extraction. It's not going to explode. There's probably more ethanol sitting on the shelves of the grocery store that's next door or slightly down the street than there would be at this facility. We have an expert here who's going to talk about the safety of ethanol and is going to confirm that all of the fires that the other public testimony talked about were from hydrocarbon extraction units, not ethanol, which is much more stable. With regard to the shared alley easement, this particular property is at the end of the alley and there's a wider space. We do have a traffic engineer who's going to talk briefly about that. They prepared a report. They found that it could work. And, you know, I would just end my comments there unless you have any questions for me. I'm probably not the best person to ask about the engineering type stuff, but legal stuff I can answer.
Thank you, Speaker. Anyone else wishing to comment?
Good evening. My name is David Nicoletti. I'm the owner of DTN Engineering. I'm a civil engineer representing the Emerald Triangle Group and doing the design on the building, and I also perform the traffic analysis for the park and the special exemption for the loading zone. First of all, as you can see, we've got an exhibit up there for the loading zone. The turning movements for these vehicles were modeled using software that basically indicated that the 18-foot long vans would have the ability to pull in and out of the property for loading and unloading without impacting any of the other residents' ability to perform parking or loading and unloading around their building in the back. Okay. The other thing that I'd like to also bring up is that regarding the metal building, it's explosion-proof, that's kind of a misnomer regarding this application. Basically, the 2-hour fire rating of that building is a more applicable term, which I think staff had presented and spoke to. And 2-hour fire rating, it would be nothing more than the appropriate amount of interior sheetrock, basically, and wood framing inside the metal building itself to prevent that and to basically make sure that we do have a 2-hour fire rating on the building. In addition to that, state law, county ordinance requires that for any permits to be issued for manufacturing or distribution, the buildings in question will have to be brought up to current code and approved by the state and local agencies prior to any occupancy occurring. And that does also include ADA compliance, and that ADA compliance is going to enhance the front of that building due to the installation of a man trap as well as an appropriate entryway and exitway for ADA access. The exterior of the building will be painted, and that approach for ADA access has occurred on other buildings along Redwood Drive in Garberville. One thing I would like to say is that I did do the civil engineering on a project here in Eureka on 4th Street coming into town for Kiskanu. It's been in operation for a year. That building does not look like a boarded up building. That actually was an old used car lot that was abandoned and it was sitting vacant. There's a lot of vagrancy occurring there. Now that there's somebody occupying that building, the building's been painted, it's been brought up to code, and it actually is no longer an eyesore, being empty as it was. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Speaker. Next speaker, please.
Good evening, Commissioners. Natalinda Lapp, Operations Director for the Humboldt County Growers Alliance. I'm here tonight asking you to approve the project for Emerald Triangle Group. Joe and his company have been members of our organization for almost 3 years from the beginning, and is one of the people who we asked to come into compliance back in late 2015 and early 2016. When we were writing this ordinance 1.0, we specifically designated commercial community districts for this type of activity. Joe went through the process, bought the building, and has been able to move forward all the way to this point, which has been a 3-year process. Since that time, we've had multiple different laws have changed, water board stuff has changed, we have new state laws, new state regulations, and through that process, we've repeatedly asked, please do not continue to move the goalpost on these applicants as they've moved forward. He has followed all of the requirements of Ordinance 1.0. There were no setback requirements during that process. We also got smarter, and when we did update 2.0, we figured that stuff out and we've included that. I don't know how many projects are still in the hopper under 1.0, but I don't think it's probably that many. So I don't think that there's a real big risk that we're gonna see a lot more stuff that's gonna be degrading or impacting sensitive receptors. I think that the products that are being made and developed by this company are a high quality product that bring value to our community and are a value added product that is exported out to the other parts of the state. And that's something that we want to continue to build and support. So with that, I say, please approve this project tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Speaker. Anyone else?
My name is Nick Barrett. I'm a product specialist at Delta Separations. They would be using our ethanol extraction equipment, and I just kind of wanted to go over some facts about our equipment and ethanol extraction in general. It is not hydrocarbon extraction. Ethanol is not a volatile gas that evaporates at room temperature. A lot of the explosions or accidents that were brought up by the opposition were with hydrocarbon extraction, which does require a C1D1 build and a lot more extensive build out. Everything has to be hardwired into the building. The 4-hour firewalls, it's much more extensive. Ethanol extraction does not require that. It's a C1D2. So there are some things like, the 2-hour firewall. Some guys will put sprinklers in their rooms to upgrade the building class so they can process more. John's group is actually processing pretty low amount of ethanol, using only 55 to 110 gallons in use. This ethanol will be enclosed in the system at all times. It will never be exposed to atmosphere. Our system is a centrifuge. It's a good way to think about it as a fancy washing machine. They're packing bags of biomass that will go into the machine. The ethanol will go into that. There'll be a wash cycle and a spin out. We recover 98% of our ethanol, so the material is going into the machine dry and coming out dry to the touch, which fire marshals really like. We have over 500 systems here in the US and in other countries. We've never had an accident with our gear when it's being ran properly into spec. And everything's commissioned by our team, and fire marshals and whatnot are very familiar with our gear as well. I just really wanted everyone to understand that it is not hydrocarbons and shouldn't be looked at as hydrocarbons. It is very safe. When you look at other industries such as distilleries, breweries, wineries, they typically have more ethanol on site and do not have to go through the same kind of regulations that cannabis operations have to go by. Beauty salons actually usually have a ton of acetone, so there's probably been a lot more volatile stuff in a non-certified building back in the day than there would be now, currently.
Thank you, Speaker. Anyone else wishing to comment?
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome, Melanie. I've not spoken before you, so I know you're not new, but you're new to me. My name is Julie Williams. I'm with Omsburg and Preston, and I'm speaking in support of this project this evening from a little bit of a different perspective. I think the speakers tonight have had some valid concerns, and I think that the project proponents are more than prepared to address any concerns that may or may not come up. From a common sense perspective, the concrete building in Garberville was an old septic tank building. I'm old enough, I remember. And it would not be up to code. So the replacement of it with a metal building is going to be an improvement for the whole system, and it will be built to all of the different codes that are applicable. So I think that's a good idea. The other issue was it's not a replacement of a cannabis. Well, obviously it's not, because cannabis wasn't legal back in the day of beauty shop. So having said that, if you consider the issue with the project is the ethanol and whether or not is combustible or not, there are certainly chemicals used in beauty shops, liquor stores, gas stations, refrigeration systems of grocery stores that are just as combustible, if not more so. So I think you have a good project in front of you. I hope you can vote to support it tonight. And I think if you do come up with the conditions of approval, I think the applicant really does want to fulfill the need of a cannabis support business, and we're short of that. And the other good positive thing about this is he wants to provide that support to a community that doesn't want to have everybody go back into the black market. That's another really big deal, okay? He wants to be permitted. Please help him. Thank you.
Thank you, Speaker. Anyone else wishing to comment?
Baker. I own Giddy Up. I'm Coffee, which is about 100 feet downwind from where these exhaust fans are going to be put in to exhaust smells and so forth that we just heard about. So naturally, I really don't want to smell that. I think if you ask this engineer over here, if you could find a worse place to put an extraction building in southern Humboldt, you might say, well, maybe the high school gymnasium, maybe a church. This is a 3-story building. It's been there 100 years. It's a matchbox. There isn't enough parking anywhere. I'm sure anybody can sit down and say that there's lots of parking here. There really isn't. And I know this guy, John, right here, he bought this building. That was his mistake right there. He should not have bought this building. You can't find a worse place to have an extraction place, right downtown Garberville, and with a wood building. That concrete building was not a septic tank. That building has got 10-foot walls. It was an old ice house, and I've seen old pictures of Garberville, and about the only thing that showed up was that concrete building. The thing's been there about 100 years or so. And I heard the word common sense from this attorney. Common sense would dictate that if you're going to have a unit like this, you don't want to have it in the middle of town. With the distribution part and the extraction's all good. Anytime you can employ somebody in Garberville, that's great. But it needs to be somewhere else, not in downtown Garberville, in an old wooden building, right in the middle of town, where if it explodes, everything downwind or everywhere around it is gonna be bad. Then you heard the guy talking about the extraction. He said, when they're used properly. Yeah, maybe. How do we know it's gonna be used properly? How do we know there's not gonna be butane in it instead of alcohol? We don't know that. As soon as you put the rubber stamp on it, these guys can do anything they want. Unless you got a county employee standing there watching over them. And they will. So that's my opinion. I've been there 18 years, right there beside it. We don't need this thing there. It would be great to have something like that around the area, I think. But not there. That's a bad, completely bad location.
Thank you, Speaker. Anyone else wishing to comment?
Hi.
You can bring that down.
I own a property in front of on Lucas Street, single-family residence. Be a little weird to have something like this in that property or close to that property. I don't know this guy who just talked, but he has the same notes that I have here. The lawyer saying common sense. Common sense? No, that's no common sense to put this kind of thing in the middle of town. And there's plenty of places outside town to do something like this, and I'm sure it's needed and it's a thing that people want, but in town, in the middle of town, is crazy. It doesn't make any sense at all. I had other comments, but I'm nervous. Yeah, this is not a good thing to put in a cute little town that is gonna have this. I hope you vote it down. Just ask them to move it somewhere else. Thank you.
Thank you, Speaker. Anyone else wishing to comment? You've already commented, so if we have a question, we can certainly bring you back.
I just wanted to request.
That's fine. Anyone else wishing to comment? Anyone? Seeing no one, we'll close this section of the public comment, and we will bring it back to the commissioners for discussion. Commissioners? Brian?
I just wanted to follow up with our county council. We've been given legal opinions that the CEQA exemptions that we're using are inappropriate, and I was wondering if you could list the two and talk about under what about this circumstance and make these appropriate for our CEQA exemptions.
Thank you. So 15301 is about existing facilities. It's for the operation, repair, maintenance, permitting, leasing, licensing, or minor alteration of existing public or private structures and facilities involving negligible or no expansion of use beyond that existing at the time of the determination. And it talks about interior and exterior alterations involving such things as partitions, plumbing, electrical conveyances, which reminds me of the ADA alterations that the applicant was talking about here. And it has a list of types of things that might apply. And then 15303 talks about new construction or conversion of small structures, which would be that building in the back. Subsection E is accessory or appurtenant structures, including garages, carports, patios, swimming pools, and fences. Class 3 consists of construction and location of limited number of new small facilities or structures, installation of small new equipment and facilities and small structures, or the conversion of existing small structures from one use to another. This is what we're using for the construction of that small 150 square foot building or shed.
And just to be clear, there's no requirement under the existing facility exemption that the use be identical to the previous use of the building. Is that what you're saying?
The theory here is that the use would still be a commercial use, which is consistent with the character of the existing use of the building as has been over time.
Okay, thank you.
Any other comments, questions? Well, since it's quiet, I guess I will make a couple of comments here. I've read this, and I'm born and raised in Southern Humboldt. I know Garberville quite well, and we had we've had a project very, very similar to this about a year ago, about maybe 2 blocks behind this. If I remember right, the problem always was and always is parking. In this project a year or so ago, somebody wanted a cemetery. They're going to park in the cemetery, bring their commercial trucks, trucks down through the cemetery. And so parking always has been a problem. And I guess a couple of questions for staff that I have on this parking is there's a 4-bedroom residence above, and there is on the second floor there is 3 or 4 office buildings, which only one is currently occupied. So the other 2 could be occupied. There's only a limited number of off-street parking, or on-street parking. And the off-street parking indicated that on this particular parcel, there's not enough room for any more off-street parking. And I guess my question would be there's been several projects like this. I mentioned the one here in Garberville. There we had, I think, one in Willow Creek, and I think we had one in Myrtle Avenue that has to do with this parking. Because if somebody else wants to come in and occupy the second floor, because there's 2 vacant deals, or they came on the 3rd floor, which has 4 bedrooms, all of a sudden, you've got more parking going to be necessary. And you also indicated that there was 2 or 3 or 4 vacant buildings somewhere on the street there close by. And so if we start issuing a permit and allowing that permittee, where he may, if he was in another location, have to have off-street parking, we allow him to come in with 5 employee parking that's going to park on the street. What's that do to these guys that own these empty buildings or have the empty offices? Does that mean when they rent theirs, all of a sudden you've just exacerbated the parking problem? Does that mean that perhaps their building value may diminish because there's no parking for theirs. And I think that parking is a big, big problem in Garberville. And I think Public Works has a recommendation in here, something along the lines of some kind of parking review authority or something. I don't remember the exact wording in there, but, you know, I would say that that's something entirely appropriate that Garberville needs to look at. Because we can't sit here, I don't think, and individualize permit by permit and address this overhanging parking problem that we have, and it's always been there. So I'm a little bit conflicted, because I think this is a good project. I think it's just in the wrong spot. Now, I said that about other projects too. I voted against the one in Willow Creek, which I believe did get approved, because it was, in my opinion, the same thing. It was a good project in the wrong spot. And we've had a speaker talk tonight, and he talked about the character of the community. In fact, I think we've had two different speakers tonight bring up kind of neighborhood community character. And I think it's a stretch, a real stretch, for us to take a 1950 building that says beauty sign on there, move forward 70 years and say it's kind of an existing use, it's kind of the same thing, so therefore we can transfer all the parking rights and everything that were there in 1950. Because if you remember what's on the screen there, those cars you saw on there, they were 1940 vintage, 1950 vintage cars. And so I think it's a stretch for us to say that we can transfer the parking rights from a 1950 beauty shop to a manufacturing facility that's now in the middle of a community which is kind of characterized by retail. And for that, I think that it's a good project. It's in the wrong spot. It needs to find more of a location that's more manufacturing, more industrial oriented as compared to retail. That's my take on it.
How many employees is the business expecting to employ?
There would be 5 employees per shift. There could be up to 3 shifts, so there could be 15 people total employed, but the number working at a single time would be 5.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
I'll agree with just about everything that Commissioner Morris said. He took most of my points. We've had it thrown out twice. The common sense went out the window when we made the cannabis ordinances, so I don't even know why we talk about that. Minor alterations. I am a building contractor, and there's nothing minor about the alterations that this project's doing. Building that building in the back is a major undertaking. Bringing that building up to ADA, I'd have concerns with the apartment and such above that kind of a building, so I think I wouldn't be in support of this project.
So one of the public commenters brought up the exceptions argument for the CEQA exemption, and there are only a few circumstances where you would have an exception to an exemption. So one of those is listed as unusual circumstances, and that's referring to scenic or historical resources. So it has to be listed as a scenic highway, for example. Then you have the cumulative impacts. So there has to be a high risk of cumulative impacts. And then thirdly, which is the one that, could arguably be applied here, is location. And that refers to where there's a high risk of hazard. There's something of hazardous nature, for example. So then we have to ask ourselves, well, how hazardous is it? And ultimately, it's not really that hazardous, at least from a legal point of view, if it is done according to code, which it will be, because honestly, the industry is incredibly regulated. And although perhaps the county doesn't have the personnel to do inspections on everything, the state does have the ability to keep track of what's going on to a much larger degree. I also happen to have been a lab technician for 11 years, so I'm very familiar with extractions. Ethanol has recently been reclassed as non-volatile. It is a fairly non-volatile solvent. Where I'm from, it was considered more, I guess, dangerous for a while, simply because when you extract with ethanol, you need a lot of it, because you need to saturate whatever it is you're treating. In this case would be flour. So because you need to saturate, you need a high volume. And so for that reason, it can be seen as hazardous, although it isn't considered volatile. So there is that. And so I just wanted to put that out there. Arguably, though, you know, my mother used to drag me to a rural beauty shop to try to perm my hair as a child. And I would say that, you know, there's a good case to be made that those places were far more hazardous than this place. So I don't really see that there's an exception to the exemption here from a CEQA standpoint. So in regards to the other comments, I also don't see that there's any other reason to not approve the project. I don't see any other local type exceptions that would be made either. And you know, although it's hard to see the value in having an extraction facility on Main Street, and so I do understand that sentiment. I mean, it does seem a little odd, but on the other hand, you know, you go to many main streets now and there are breweries. There are distilleries now everywhere. And, you know, it's ultimately the same sort of thing. So I think it's more something that seems really wrong now, but something that everyone will quickly get used to. And indeed, I don't know if this would be allowed, but I think that it could actually bring a lot of tourism to Garberville, because if there were tours offered, because with I believe it's a Type 6 license. Yeah. So a Type 6 license allows you to do both N and P licenses too. So you're allowed to do infusions and other things as well. And that there's a lot of interest from tourists to come up here and see, you know, not only where the product is made, but also where it's extracted. So I wouldn't say that would be a huge reason to approve the project, but I just thought it would be something of interest to bring up to the applicant, and it might make your project a little bit more palatable, perhaps, if suddenly there's an infusion, pun intended, of tourists to the area.
Brian?
Mr. Chairman, is it all right if I attempt to make a motion?
We through with discussion? Everyone got their comments out?
Well, I did just want to ask one question of staff. Actually gets back to the point that Kent Sawatsky made earlier, because it caught my attention too, Mr. Luther. So we are being asked to make a special finding as far as the compliance with the general plan land use designation. Is that correct?
That's not entirely correct.
Okay.
It's not that you're being asked to make a special finding, but you know what Mr. Sawatsky said was that it's not zoned correctly. That's not actually the case. It is zoned correctly. This use is allowed under that zone. However, the general plan designation for the property is community commercial general. And as you can see on the slide here, in the general plan, it outlines the allowable use types and the not allowable use types.
Mm-hmm.
Now, unfortunately, most of the cannabis uses that are now allowed under the two cannabis ordinances do not fit very nicely into those specified use types.
Mhm.
And so it's really unclear whether those uses are consistent with this general plan designation because they don't fit nicely into any of those use types. And so that's why we are focusing on the specified intent of that land use designation, which is that it's intended to classify lands because of their location, access, and availability of services that are suitable for commercial development. This includes retail trade services that are easily accessible, compatible, and geared for regional needs. That's the intent of this ordinance. So what we are asking the Planning Commission to do is consider whether this is consistent with that intent and whether it's really consistent with that general plan designation.
Yeah, and can you, I don't see where it says uses that are deemed not compatible with that designation. Am I missing that, or?
Sure, if you could, so the column on the left where the arrow is CG, you can see all of the use types that they're outlining. An X would indicate that that's a consistent use type, and if there's no X there, it would indicate that it's not.
Got it, okay. Warehousing, storage, and distribution is considered not compatible, correct? Mm-hmm. Okay.
What's important there, excuse me, is that there are definitions of these use types.
Right.
I think in the staff report, we did outline definitions, but probably not. It's probably happening.
On page 4 of the staff report, the use types are defined. Each one of those, such as the heavy commercial uses, which are not allowable uses in the CG zone, are defined as activities such as transfer, storage, or processing of used scrap or waste materials, including automobile wrecking, sales, storage of building materials, construction and agricultural equipment, kennels, and animal hospitals. Warehousing, storage, and distribution is also not consistent with the CG designation and is defined as establishments or places of business primarily engaged in enclosed or open-air wholesaling, storage, distribution, and handling of materials other than live animals and plants.
Mm-hmm.
And it goes on with...
Meaning that plants are allowed. Is that what you just said?
Well, it could be interpreted that it's other than plants, right? So it's talking about these various uses that would fit under the distribution and warehousing type. And then it says other than live animals and plants. Those are accepted from that definition here.
So that means that under the warehousing part there that says it's not compliant with CG, that is an exception to where animals and plants are acceptable for CG? Because this has a double negative in
Understood.
here.
So I don't want to say that they are acceptable, but they appear to be accepted from the definition of warehousing, storage, and distribution.
They're not acceptable.
Right.
So that means they are.
I mean, if I can just make a quick comment, I think when somebody doesn't like a project in downtown Garberville, they can always throw the parking objection at it. Garberville needs more parking, but it also needs businesses to open. I lived outside of Garberville for 12 years, and it breaks my heart to see empty storefronts there now. I'm not that concerned about the parking issue, and I'm also, as Melanie said, I'm not that concerned about the volatility of the chemical use or the amount of it. I think it's comparable to or less than what happens in lots of other commercial facilities. But I think the core objection that people have raised really does go to this question of, is this compatible with the zoning for what is intended to be there? And the thing that I find so difficult about this, though, is that it appears that this applicant has done everything right for 3 years. You know, I mean, they've gone through the process, and they were told then that this zoning was compatible with the facility, as I understand it, and that the setbacks and so forth that, of course, were written in later, those didn't apply back then either. I mean, I can really understand the people who are coming in here and saying this doesn't feel like the right place for a facility like this, but ultimately the call was made 3 years ago that they could. I mean, is that correct? I mean, we would be essentially overruling the advice that you gave the applicant about whether the zoning of this property was compatible with this sort of a project.
Through the chair, I don't know that that's the case.
No?
Number one, the zoning, again, it is fully compatible with the zoning. So
Okay.
the issue is the general plan designation.
Right. That's what I meant.
And I don't believe anybody at the county planning department ever asserted that it was consistent with this general plan designation or that it was inconsistent. Because one of the things that is somewhat unfortunate, I guess, about the cannabis activities that are now permitted under the two cannabis ordinances is that they were never contemplated in the county's general plan definitions of use types. And so they don't fit very nicely in there. And that's really the question is it consistent with this general plan designation, given that we don't really have a lot of clear guidance?
Right. Okay, that's helpful. Thank you.
I'd like to clarify a little bit here because I've heard some stuff here which kind of disturbs me. As we sat here and the issue came up, well, the applicant's been working on it for 3 years based on the advice that he got from staff. And if that's what we're going to use for our decision-making, there's no need for us to be up here. If staff's advice is so complete and so compelling, so correct, and so legal, there's no need for a commission up here. So whatever the staff said and whatever the applicant did, the applicant in this case is just like an applicant for any other project. If you're going to do a subdivision or whatever else, if you make the investment, you go through it. If things go right, you get your permit. If something unforeseen comes up or something comes up that wasn't envisioned, then your permit may be modified, may be put in jeopardy. You may not get it. And so I don't think that, for us to sit here and say that just because the applicant worked on it for 3 years based on the advice of staff, then all of a sudden, we might need to bend one way. That's not the way this system works. And listening to, everyone's comments tonight, before we get to the motion, because I know Brian, he wants to get to the motion stage here. We've got to make 6 required findings in order for us to approve it. And out of the 6, there's 2 that I don't think we can make based on the evidence before us. Well, I don't believe we can make finding number 2, which says that the proposed development is consistent with the purpose of the existing zone in which the site is located. And we've had that discussion that we have to look at intent. We need to look at the general plan was developed before the cannabis ordinances. To me, the language is either clear or it isn't clear. I mean, it's either one way or the other. And so I don't think we could make the finding that's consistent with the zoning. I don't believe we can make finding number 4. And number 4 says the proposed development and conditions will not be detrimental to public health, safety, welfare, or materially injurious to property or improvements in the vicinity. And that, I think, goes back to the character of the neighborhood. And I believe that we cannot make finding number 4, we cannot make finding number 2, based on what I've heard tonight and based on what I've seen in the staff report.
Well, I guess I have to respectfully disagree with you, Bob. I just heard the staff say that this was exactly consistent with the zoning. The question wasn't the zoning, it was potentially the land use designation. And I feel that your comment about the degradation of the neighborhood harkens back to a time when pot was this scary, evil new thing that was going to ruin our communities. And I've heard that over and over and over again. And yet after we passed them, I've never talked to someone who felt like that had actually happened in their town.
Degradation of my community had nothing to do with cannabis. It has to do with manufacturing in the middle of what I believe has historically been a retail neighborhood. That's what I think the difference is that we have primarily a retail atmosphere on Main Street in Garberville. And does manufacturing really fit in there? And, you know, I think it's changes the character of the neighborhood. Not anything to do with pot or the how people view pot.
May I ask a question of the chair?
Go ahead.
So if it were, for example, Alchemy or one of the distilleries, you would just, for consistency, you would feel the same way?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Even though there's so many storefronts in town that are vacant and potentially blighted, and this would bring it up to a functioning building that adds jobs and it's going to be redone.
Again, I'll go back and say, I think this is a good project. It's just the wrong location. Maybe, you know, if it was in the Meadows or it was some other area, I think that'd be great for it. But I think Main Street, downtown Garberville, radically changes the character of what I know Garberville to be. Mike?
I have to weigh in on that part. It's mainly a retail with a small manufacturing, 200 square feet, 180 square feet in the back, in the alley. So it's not really deteriorating the front, you know, the main street with the retail atmosphere, because that is part of the business, is the distribution part there, as well as perhaps some other items that will be going in there later. The redo of this old structure is, from my standpoint as an insurance person, one of those things that always needs to be done, because those old structures are just fire traps, just waiting for a little flame to start, and it goes up in smoke quickly. So I would be more moved to approve the project with the requirements that have been put forth by the staff.
Brian?
May I make my motion?
Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to close the public hearing and make the following motion to approve the application. To find the project exempt from environmental review pursuant to sections 15301 and 15303 of the state CEQA guidelines, make all the required findings for approval of the special permits based on the evidence in the staff report, and adopt the resolution approving the proposed Emerald Triangle LLC Company special permits subject to the recommended conditions.
I'll second that.
We have a motion and a second. Any question on the motion?
No, I'd just like to comment. Some of the things that were brought forth by the public here about odors and other things there are all spelled out in the requirements for this project as well. So there should not be any. But if you do, you need to bring a complaint forward. So, and then it'd be looked at for compliance. So that was my comment.
Any other comments, questions? Ready for the question. All in favor, please signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed? No. Motion passes 4-2. And with that, let's see. I think that takes care of our agenda tonight, and our next meeting is on December 19th at 6 PM. And does the commit,
When?
December 19th.
Is that true?
Is that true? I was told we weren't having. a meeting
I'm just going by the agenda, on the
Right.
agenda. Director.
Thank you, Chair. I would like to say that we do not have anything to notify or to advertise for the 19th, so there will be no meeting on December 19th.
So we're going, next meeting will be in January?
The next meeting will be in January, and one of the questions that we have for you tonight is whether or not we can move from the 2nd and the 16th to the 9th and the 23rd, and then that would allow us to move into February in an every other week sequence.
That works, that's okay for me.
And that works for me. I returned that email to Suzanne.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's good.
Okay.
So then
and the
we'll-
next meeting will be on the
9th of January.
January. Any other comments, commissioners or director, before we adjourn?
I do not have any at this time.
All right, seeing none, we will adjourn the December 5th meeting of the Humboldt County Planning Commission.